A radio studio, a red light, a breath held in the air. Outside, a country moves through ordinary morning routines. Inside, a king leans toward a microphone and tells the world he is leaving. Not because of war, not because of illness, because of one woman. And in that moment, a private romance becomes a constitutional rupture. The question is not whether they loved each other. The question is, when does love become a political emergency, and why was she never forgiven? Wallis Simpson begins far from palaces, not in gold rooms, but in ordinary American rooms where status is something you build, not inherit. She is born in 1896 in Baltimore, Bessie Wallis Warfield. Her father dies when she is a baby. Her mother struggles. Money is scarce. Status is everything. She learns early that security can vanish quickly and that the world listens differently when you speak with confidence. In time, she enters bigger circles, sharper circles, rooms where the right dress is a passport, where a conversation can be an invitation, where one small mistake can close every door at once. In 1916, she marries Earl Winfield Spencer Jr., a naval pilot. The marriage is unhappy. He drinks. She escapes. In 1928, she marries Ernest Simpson, a British-American businessman. She moves to London, not into the highest tier, but close enough to touch the edge of power. And in the early 1930s, she is introduced to the Prince of Wales, Edward, the most famous bachelor in Europe, a man trained to be a symbol long before he was allowed to be a person. And the danger isn't that he notices her. The danger is that he does not look away. Edward is effortless in public, smiles, handshakes, charm. But behind palace doors, he is impatient with the machine built around him, a life scheduled by tradition, a personality managed by advisors, a future written in ink before he can argue with it. With Wallis, something shifts, not because she flatters him, but because she doesn't. She speaks like the world is not afraid of him. She corrects him, teases him, focuses him. And for a man drowning in deference, that kind of normality can feel like oxygen. The relationship deepens. Weekends become patterns. Patterns become dependence. Fort Belvedere becomes their refuge. His weekend house in Surrey, there she plans dinners, chooses curtains, receives guests, acts like a hostess, like a partner, and London society begins to whisper. Then the reality catches up, cold and legal. Wallis is divorced and still married again. In their world, that is not a private complication. It is a locked door. Because if Edward ever tries to make her official, it won't be a scandal. It will be a collision with the crown itself. January 1936. King George V dies. The heir becomes King Edward VIII. And overnight, the romance stops being whispered and becomes state business. Because the monarch is not only a man, he is the public face of the Church of England. And at the time, the rule is brutal in its simplicity. A divorced woman with living former husbands cannot be queen. Now the government enters the story, and the tone changes. This is no longer about feelings. It is about whether the system can survive a king who refuses its limits. Cabinet meetings tighten. Advisors warn. Behind closed doors, the same sentence keeps returning in different forms. If you insist, something will break. Edward believes love should win. The state believes duty must win. And both sides understand the same terrifying truth. There is no compromise that keeps everyone whole. There is only a choice. And the countdown has already started. December 1936 arrives like a storm you can hear before you see. Ministers warn him. The press hovers at the edge of silence. Friends plead for retreat. Even Wallis considers stepping away, not as a grand gesture, but as a last attempt to stop the collapse she can feel approaching. But Edward refuses, and then the moment comes down to paper. A signature, a document, a throne emptied by ink. December 10th, 1936, he signs the instrument of abdication. A king becomes a private man in one stroke. The next day, the radio address reaches millions. His voice is calm. The words are irreversible. He says he cannot carry the heavy burden without the woman I love. To some, it sounds like the greatest romance of the century. To others, it sounds like irresponsibility at the highest level. But the system has not finished speaking. Because after a crisis, a country needs a story simple enough to hold. And the simplest story has one name. Edward becomes Duke of Windsor. Wallis becomes Duchess of Windsor, but is denied Royal Highness. That refusal is not etiquette. It is exile in grammar. A message, you will not belong. June 3, 1937. They marry at the Château de Condé in France. No member of the royal family attends. Edward wears a mourning suit. Wallis wears blue. The wedding is small, quiet, and the title Royal Highness remains denied to her forever. They live abroad, surrounded by beautiful rooms, famous friends, and the illusion of freedom. Paris, the Bahamas, New York. But their life has an invisible wall. Because the monarchy did not only lose a king, it gained a wound, and wounds look for someone to blame. So Wallis becomes more than a woman. She becomes a shorthand, a warning, a symbol people can repeat in one breath, the woman he chose over the crown. And from that point onward, even ordinary moments turn sharp. A photograph becomes evidence. A dinner becomes suspicion. A rumor becomes something that follows them across borders. The romance has ended. What begins now is a different story, colder and harder to escape. Because as Europe moves toward war, the Windsors remain visible, and visibility changes meaning. In some files, in some reports, in some private conversations, their names are no longer treated as gossip. They are treated as a risk. Not every claim is proven. Not every story survives scrutiny. But the consequence does not depend on certainty. The consequence is the shift in how they are handled, less like exiles to be pitied, and more like a problem to be managed. And once you become a problem in wartime, you don't get the benefit of being misunderstood. You only get control. Edward dies first, 1972, and Wallis, once the most discussed woman in Europe, fades into isolation, illness, silence. A long ending without applause. She dies in 1986, 90 years old. But the public image remains, the woman who took a king. And maybe this is the final truth of the story. In a monarchy, love is not only a feeling, it is a threat, because it makes duty negotiable. Edward paid with his crown. Wallis paid with belonging. And once a person becomes the symbol of a crisis, forgiveness becomes almost impossible.